Today, we have some adventures in plagiarism. In particular, an example of a failure to cite sources, and an interesting example of altering text to fit a preferred narrative. That's coming up. The object of today's lesson comes from a YouTube video I watched yesterday entitled Destroying Human Evolution Part 2. I'll put the link in the video resources below so you can watch the whole thing for yourself. I'm just going to show 1 minute of that. This whole Part 2 is really about Neanderthals and how they fit into the context of how they're related to human beings, specifically within the context of a 6,000-year-old history of the world within the context of young Earth creationism. And the narrator here is explaining, as you'll see, his vision of the history of Neanderthals, and then is going to try to mention some things about Neanderthal genetics, which supports his particular view that they are very recent humans, descendants of members of those who left the Tower of Babel after Noah's flood. So without any further ado, here's a 1 minute bit of that before we explore the particular example of plagiarism that I want to look at today.
We're just sons and daughters of one of Noah's grandchildren who decided to live a life of exploration and unfortunately chose to go north. They got lost and they died from genetic disorders from living in small numbers and inbreeding over the 1,000 years. This also explains their lack of chin, which even modern-day Australian Aborigines share because of this inbreeding problem that they have as well. So the last question would be, why don't we share more genetic similarity with these ancient Neanderthal if they just lived a few thousand years ago? Wouldn't it take tens of thousands of years for DNA similarity to be weeded out? Actually, no. And published in Genetics, a team conducted simulations to model what would happen if Neanderthal did indeed occur mutations at a quicker rate than modern humans. What would happen to the offspring shared between humans and Neanderthal? Well, the study revealed that rather than genetic similarity slowly declining over time, Neanderthal DNA in modern human genomes would have been rapidly decreased during the first 10 up to 20 generations. So a time period of less than 600 years maximum. Then it would remain unchanged throughout all future generations. And this is exactly what we see. Neanderthals, being a product of evolution, is falsified.
So there we are. There's a lot in there. It's kind of, in my mind, a little bit of a word salad in the sense that he's actually mixing a variety of different ideas and concepts together. But overall, he's trying to say, oh, look, the genomes and genetic evidence supports this idea that Neanderthals haven't been really around that long. And so a couple families leaving Babel about 4,000 years ago after Noah's flood, and their languages were confused. And so you had a couple families that had the same language. They wander off and they somehow get lost and they end up in Europe, and they set up, homes there, and they have offspring there. And he doesn't tell his audience that actually Neanderthals are found over several thousand square mile region, and there's multiple sites, and there's probably hundreds of locations where they existed. So it's not a tiny population overall, but admittedly, each individual location probably had a small population. And that does have certain effects on the genetics of a population. But nonetheless, he has to squeeze in some population of Neanderthals sort of taking over areas of Europe less than 4,000 years ago, prior to then other modern humans or humans that are from lineages that exist today coming into Europe and then hybridizing with a few individual Neanderthals, which then share their genome, portions of their genome with modern human lineages. But of course, since then, much of that lineage has been lost, such there's only like 2% of the Neanderthal genome in European lineage, or most European lineages today. But that's not really addressing the many problems with this particular hypothesis is not the topic of the day. The topic of the day is plagiarism and something we can learn about plagiarism and the use of scientific literature inappropriately. All right, so where do we see that? All right, so I went home and I took the screenshot of the particular video I just showed. Here's a screenshot from that, in which he introduces us very quickly to, oh, there's this paper in genetics. And so here's this secular article that supports this thing I'm trying to say about mutations in accruing in Neanderthals, and how it wouldn't take that long to sort of wash out the Neanderthal genome from the humans and from modern humans. And so, he refers to this article genetics, and here's the image that's on the screen. You saw that. And you might think that at first that this is actually a quote from that particular paper, but once you start to read it, you realize that this isn't directly from the paper itself, because it wouldn't refer to itself, right? So published in Genetics, a team conducted simulations to model what would have happened in Neanderthals if Neanderthals did indeed accrue mutations much more quickly than modern humans, and so forth. All right. And so I saw this, and I thought, as I'm watching through this video, this was the one spot where I thought, I wonder if this paper actually supports this idea that that there was a rapid decrease in the amount of Neanderthal information in the human genome over time, or very quickly, soon after that hybridization event took place. Right? Let me go to the paper and actually see it. So I looked up that paper in genetics. I just searched for that particular title in Google Scholar, found the particular paper, and I have to admit, I started reading through it, and I'm like, where did this come from? Like, where did this particular text come from? And I thought, well, maybe the narrator of this video actually wrote this summary of this particular text, right? Published in Genetics, a team conducted simulations. And this is what he reads as the narrator over the next couple slides, as if the next couple slides show evidence supporting what he is saying right here. But I was still curious, because I could not find this last sentence, the information in the paper, a time period of less than 600 years. Now, he's trying to say this word 600 years because it sounds like this wouldn't take very long, right? We only have 4,000 years to work with. And so if humans and modern human lineages and Neanderthals intermixed sometime after the flood, and again, it would have to be quite a long time after the flood for other variety of genetic reasons, which he doesn't recognize or tell his audience. But nonetheless, once that interbreeding happens, how long would it take for modern human genomes to look the way they do now? Would it take 50,000 years? Because in the secular literature, this is when that hybridization took place, about 45,000 years to 55,000 years ago. And so that leads to the impression that, hey, that happened a long time ago, and then it took 50,000 years to get to the point that it is today. And so if I can show that happened in a lot less time, then that makes it much more plausible. And so it says less than 600 years. I thought, well, now I see the paper is talking about a rapid decline in the amount of negative mutations or negative fitness alleles in Neanderthals that are present in modern humans, and the paper is suggesting that those were washed out very quickly. Over just 10 to 20 generations, you would have gotten rid of most of the negative effects of the Neanderthal genome, which there are significant differences between Neanderthal genomes and humans, despite what he says in the rest of the video, which he tries to make it sound like there's no difference. But there's some 9 million different individual spots in their genome that are different than the average modern human of all the diversity of humans alive today. So that's actually a significant amount of variation. It includes a lot of variation in genes or alleles, version of genes that are not present in modern humans, other than these copies that come from Neanderthals through this hybridization event. All right, back to this particular text here, and I was thinking, well, now how did he come up with this particular summary of that particular paper, which talks about it being less than 600 years to get to sort of like this flatline point where it's just like modern humans today? And so I decided I would actually, I just I just Google searched this, right? I just took this text, I wrote it out, I put it into Google search bar, and I came right up with where this text comes from. This text was not written by the narrator. as I will show you in just a moment. This is directly copied text from a popular journal that is summarizing the results of other research. And so where this text came from that he is reading as the narrator and showing on the screen without any citation as to where he got it, certainly leading his audience to the impression that he wrote that particular text. Like, I understand this literature and I'm explaining it to you. Here's my summary of this important genetics paper. Actually comes from The Scientist from 2019. That genetics paper is from 2016. This is an article from 2019, which is introducing a new article from Proceedings of National Academy of Science, which then discusses this genetics article in the context of this newer article, which the author, this narrator, really should look at. It's a great article from PNAS, which I think will help him understand this the context of this genetics much better. But anyway, here it is: Neanderthal ancestry in Europeans unchanged for 45,000 years. And yes, this article is supporting the idea that there was hybridization, and then very quickly most of the negative alleles were swept out of that population, along with a large portion of the genome. Most of the genome was swept out through other effects, but when you have negative alleles, negative fitness alleles, you have to sweep them out in other ways. So I've told myself I wasn't going to get all of the genetics, so I got to stop myself. We're sticking to the main story, the plagiarism part of it, right? And so this particular article from The Scientist is just a popular sort of level explanation of the importance of articles written in the scientific journals. So, and they're referring to this PNAS article, and I'll put the link in the video for this as well. Limits of long-term selection against Neanderthal introgression. Really interesting article itself. But let's come back and ask ourselves, so let's take a look at this text from this particular paper and compare it to what the narrator of this video has read. So here's a side-by-side comparison. In other reports, so here's The Scientist. In other reports published the same year in Genetics, a different team conducted simulations to model what would have happened. What would have happened? All right, now look down here. A team conducted simulations to model what would have happened if Neanderthals did indeed accrue mutations much more quickly than modern humans. Same line up here, much more quickly than modern humans. This is verbatim quoting from this particular Scientist article. And then it says, and then he has, what would have happened? What would happen to the offspring shared between humans and Neanderthal? That sentence is missing. So that sentence has been added in. All right. I guess the narrator of this video added this particular sentence, and then it goes right back. This study, all right, and so there is a changed word here, this study, so it is intentional, all right? He's intentionally sculpting the words from this other author of the Scientist article. He's clearly taken that and he's sculpting it to fit a slightly different narrative by asking his own question and then using the text of the Scientist to answer that particular question. You'll see revealed that rather than genetic similarity, interesting right here. This word similarity, which is a misspelling, I believe, a similarity. So, and it happens to be the only word that's added to that sentence. That's the word added to the sentence. You notice that this word is not found in the previous sentence. This study revealed that rather than slowly, all right, declining over time. I just noticed. Sorry. Rather than genetic similarity, slowly declining over time. So he added those two words in, misspelling one of them. And then it goes right back to Neanderthal DNA in modern human genomes would have been rapidly decreased during the first 10 to 20 generations after the two people groups interbred. All right. Period. Here it's a comma. A time period less than 600 years than remained. less than 600 years, then remained unchanged. Now, interbred, a time period of less than 1,000 years, then remained unchanged through future generations. Ask myself, so my original question was, where did the 600 come from? That's what I was looking for when I went to the original genetics article, in which I could not find a discussion that mentioned 600 years. I didn't even find actually 1,000 years, but you could infer the 1,000 years from the evidence, from the actual material in that genetics article. But the 600 years is not there. And it's pretty obvious that the narrator has plagiarized and he's taken the text somebody else wrote, using it for his own narration with slight edits. But I don't consider this a slight edit. So this isn't like a student who is writing a term paper and they copy a variety of sources and then they kind of manipulate a few words so it doesn't look exactly copied, but it still holds the same meaning. By the way, that's still plagiarism, because you're still copying most of the words and the thoughts of another writer and using them and taking credit for them for yourself. I mean, that's just the essentials of plagiarism. But this takes it another step further, right? Because here you've taken the words of another author and then you have very clearly intentionally changed, not just rewriting it in a different way to say the same thing. You've actually rewritten it so it says something different than what the original author said. And so you're saying 600 years instead of 1,000 years. That 600 years fits the narrator's narrative much better than 1,000 years. I don't think they're that different from each other. And I think he could have gotten away with 1,000 years, but I think he realizes he's on the edge of plausibility already by suggesting that Neanderthals first had to spread to Europe, and that took a while, right? And then you had Europeans, what were to become modern Europeans, come to Europe. And then you had hybridization, and then it would take 1,000 years to get to where you saw the same amount of Neanderthal DNA in Europeans over time. That would get you to just, in the last 2,000 years, which wouldn't make sense at all, because you can go back and you can dig up, graves, and we've done this, graves of modern human lineages all the way back from 4,000 years ago in Europe. And, they have about the same percentage of Neanderthal back then, which means it already had been swept out of the Neanderthal genome had already been moved out of the population, removed down to the point where there's only like 2% left long time ago. He doesn't have time for that. And so in order to find a little bit more time, make it sound a little more plausible, let's just change this to 600 years, even though that's not in the original paper, and it's not even in the thing that I was plagiarizing. So this is just out and out plagiarized material that is being expressed here. So it starts out with looking like it's directly summarizing the genetics paper himself, but it's not him summarizing the genetics paper. It's somebody else summarizing that particular genetics paper. And then it moves into editing that information in such a way that it is trying to capture an idea. Even adding the sentence also puts the focus on Neanderthal breeding, which is a little, the effects of what happened after Neanderthals and humans bred, which is something that has to do with what that paper's talking about. But it's not about just losing portions of the genome. It's specific types of mutations or specific alleles from the population are the thing in question in that particular paper. So here's the original paper by Harris and Kelly from 2016. I don't think that the narrator has actually looked up this paper at all or read this particular paper. He does have one figure that he shows from the paper. But that could be easily gotten without having read the paper. If he read the paper, I think he would, and he understood the paper, I think he would educate himself and find out that what he's actually expressing in this video is actually incorrect. And then he follows it up as he's reading. Now, if you go back to the video, I'm not going to go back to the video, but in the video, he's actually reading that particular paragraph as he's showing other pictures, as if those other pictures are supporting that particular narrative. And again, because he started out by showing a clip of that genetics article, it makes it seem like, oh, this is all information you could be gained from that genetics article. Like, this is what those authors were saying. He's taking the authority of that scientific paper, all right, and trying to then imply, right, whether intentionally or not intentionally, the way the video is designed, it implies that these other figures are supportive of that or are part of that actual research. When this particular figure, which he shows and talks about how, oh, look, of course it could have declined very quickly. Genetic information could have been lost from the human hybrid genome just in a few generations. And to that I say, well, duh, that's not, I mean, he reads this in a really dramatic voice as if like this is revelatory information. I'm like, no, this is like introduction to genetics information that any biology student should understand. If you have a modern European lineage, human lineage that is no Neanderthal at all, and meets a Neanderthal, the offspring, all right, the offspring of that particular hybrid event would be approximately 50-50, right? 50% of the genome would be like, I'm half my dad's DNA and I've got half of my mom. And I've got a set of genes from my mom, I've got a set of genes from my dad. I'm 50-50, right? But then that offspring then back crosses with what is around in the population, which are other modern human lineages, in which case it becomes 25%. Otherwise, they lose about another half of that Neanderthal DNA, and then they lose another half, and then they lose another half, and they lose another half, and you're like, hey, after only 5 generations, you're down to 3%. And this is oversimplified. That's not necessarily going to happen. But this is just about like chunks of genome and chunks of chromosomes being lost just through basic recombination. This isn't about selection, removing important alleles or alleles that are being selected against, or selection for particular alleles, maintaining them in a population. And that's what those other articles are really getting at, is the loss of those particular alleles, not just the recombination effect, and you end up with 3% after 5 to 10 generations. And then it stays constant. And it's like, well, we already knew that. I mean, that was obvious to any geneticist. This isn't something new. This isn't something controversial, as he makes it sound. But that's because he's mixing different ideas in genetics together, lumping them together as he speaks. And then this particular figure too, and this is a more minor case, but there's no citation for this figure. Again, he kind of by tossing it in there while he's reading a paragraph that you're led to believe is from that paper in genetics, it would be understandable that his audience thinks that these figures come from that paper and are supportive of that idea, when all he did was he went out and found this other figure. Doesn't cite where it came from. It took me some searching, but I did find it. It's in this kidsfrontier.org, and they recognize the two parts of this figure and actually provide the references for those particular, or they're the creator of the second part of that particular figure. So this is also, I'll call this as a little bit more minor case of plagiarism. This happens all the time on YouTube. But the prior case of manipulating the information and changing the data to fit your own narrative is the part that I guess I'm most upset with. So I'm offended as a scientist. I teach classes. I have students write research papers. I sit on graduate committees, so I'm reading dissertations and master's theses. And really, one of the more offensive things you can do in any as any researcher would be to fake data, use other people's information or use other people's data and treat it like your own. Use other people's words and treat them like your own. Use other people's thoughts and ideas and treat them like your own. And we have had graduate students who have not gotten degrees because of plagiarism, right? They have plagiarized in their dissertation or their master's thesis. And that is the unforgivable sin. Pre-med students know this very well because we have, rampant cheating problems in college, and anything writing assignment is always prone to students wanting to share other people's information, either other students' information or other sources' information. And we have some pretty firm policies on that. And if a student were to hand in a paper that included what we just saw here, right, using that paragraph, acting as if they're reading it or writing it as their own summary of that genetics paper, and I were to discover what I saw there, all right, that would be an immediate zero, right? You're getting a zero on that particular assignment, and I would probably have the capacity also to give you an F in the class. And I probably would, right? In my syllabus, it says I would have that option, and I'm probably going to go to that option. All right, that's an F. It's wrong, right? And it, especially for, say, this is going to be true for anybody, but for pre-med students, they're going to send it to student general affairs. And if they rule against the student and say that, yes, this is plagiarism, it goes on their record, they're probably not going to get into graduate school or medical school. We don't want doctors who are just willing to falsify information, right? That's not the doctor I want. And this is the kind of conversations we have with students all the time. It's like, oh, you think this is kind of innocent? Like, everybody does it. Well, that brings me to, I'm offended as a scientist, but what's more upsetting, the only reason I'm really making this video, is I'm offended as a Christian, because I expect Christians to be interested in truth. I expect them to be honest, all right? I expect them to be followers of Christ. And in my mind, plagiarism is not Christ-like behavior, right? It's trying to take, it's a form of pride. It's a form of trying to take credit for what shouldn't be credited to you, right? You're taking credit for somebody else's writing and information. And in this case, I think it's pretty clear this author is manipulating information to then make what he thinks is, he's trying to support, right? He's trying to support a young earth creation, which he believes is the accurate interpretation of the Word of God. And so in the back of his mind, I'm supporting, I'm trying to support the Word of God here. I'm standing for the truth somehow, right? But if you stand for the truth with lies, right, you're undermining the truth. You're undermining the truth in the long run. And so that's my offense, is as a Christian, you're not representing Christianity. You're not acting in Christ-like manner by making up information and taking credit for what's should be given to others. At this point, I'm kind of rambling, and so I'll just stop there and say thanks for listening. Hey, this is Joel Duff. If you found the content of this last video interesting, hit the subscribe button, and who knows what will come up next. And you can find my writings at thenaturalhistorian.com. I thank you very much for listening. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.